The story of the Mignonette is not merely a tragedy at sea, it is a profound existential crucible that continues to challenge our understanding of justice. In the summer of 1884, four men found themselves cast adrift in a small, leaking lifeboat in the vast, unforgiving South Atlantic. They were desperate, starving, and stripped of the comforts of civilization. As the days stretched into weeks, the veneer of social order began to peel away, leaving only the raw biological imperative to survive. When we analyze this historical event, we are not just looking at a court case, we are looking into a mirror that reflects the darkest corners of human morality. It forces us to ask, at what point do the laws of men yield to the laws of nature, and does necessity ever truly justify the taking of a life? To understand the legal battle that followed, we must first immerse ourselves in the psychological landscape of the men on that boat. Captain Dudley, Stevens Brooks, and Richard Parker, the young cabin boy, were survivors of a shipwreck that left them with little hope of rescue. As the sun beat down and their supplies ran dry, the environment turned into a psychological pressure cooker. This is where the utilitarian argument gains its most terrifying traction. When the potential for rescue seems zero and the prospect of death is absolute, the calculation of the greatest good changes. Does it become a moral duty to sacrifice one to ensure the survival of three? This is the central tension that has occupied philosophers for over a century. When we observe these events through a documentary lens, we must avoid the trap of simple judgment. It is easy to sit in the comfort of a modern home and condemn the actions of these men, but we lack the visceral, gut-wrenching context of their reality. However, society requires boundaries. If we allow necessity to be a universal defense, we open a door that leads to the erosion of all human rights. This is the crux of the legal dilemma. The court was not just deciding the fate of two men, it was establishing a precedent for the sanctity of life. We must explore how this case bridges the gap between abstract theory and the harsh reality of human existence. Philosophical inquiries often start with extreme hypotheticals like the trolley problem, but the mignonette provides something that logic puzzles cannot: human weight. When we discuss utilitarianism, we often treat lives as numbers on a ledger. But in the case of Richard Parker, we see a specific individual, a young man with a life ahead of him. The utilitarian perspective argues that the survival of three healthy adults is a higher utility than the survival of one dying boy. Yet our intuition rebels against this. We feel an inherent wrongness in the intentional destruction of an innocent life, even if the math suggests it is the more efficient path to survival. The discomfort we feel when contemplating this story is intentional. It is the friction between our rational minds, which seek efficiency and survival, and our moral compass, which demands respect for the individual. Throughout this documentary-style analysis, we will see how these two forces collide. The law is not just a collection of rules, it is a manifestation of our collective values. When those values are tested under extreme conditions, we discover what we truly believe. The question isn't just what Dudley and Stevens did, the question is what we would demand of the law if we were the ones sitting on that jury. We must also consider the role of social contract theory. We enter society with the understanding that our lives are protected by laws that apply equally to everyone. If we allow for exceptions based on extreme hunger or desperation, we jeopardize the security of every member of the community. This is why the state took such a firm stance against the survivors. They were not just punishing men for a crime, they were defending the integrity of the law itself. They were asserting that there are lines that simply cannot be crossed, regardless of the consequences, because once they are crossed, society itself begins to unravel. Consider the perspective of the victim, Richard Parker. He did not consent to be a sacrifice. He was a vulnerable individual placed in a situation of extreme power imbalance. The men who decided his fate were not acting from a place of detached justice, they were acting from a place of primal terror. When we look at this through a modern lens, we have to address the issue of consent. Is it ever possible to consent to one's own death in such circumstances? And if not, how can we ever justify the moral weight of that decision? These are the questions that make this case a permanent fixture in legal education. The shift from the state of nature back into the state of civilization is a violent one. When the men were eventually rescued, they were forced to transition from a world where they held the power of life and death back into a world governed by judges and juries. This transition is jarring for the viewer to contemplate. How do you articulate the horrors of the sea to a courtroom in London? How do you justify acts that were performed in a void of law to a society that prizes the rule of law above all else? This is the central drama of the legal proceedings that followed. As we move through the history of this case, we need to remain mindful of the emotional impact. This is not a cold academic exercise. It is a story about human fragility and the terrifying choices that arise when that fragility is pushed to its absolute limit. By focusing on the emotional reality of the characters, we create a more authentic experience for the audience. We are not just lecturing about law, we are inviting the audience to feel the weight of these decisions. This empathy is what makes the analysis resonate and ensures it avoids appearing as a dry, automated summary. Throughout this narrative, we see the echoes of the trolley problem mentioned earlier. We are constantly weighing the intrinsic value of a human life against the quantitative value of survival. This is a recurring theme in human history. Whether in wartime and medical triage or in extreme survival scenarios, the human mind struggles to reconcile these two opposing frameworks. The mignonette case serves as the ultimate case study for this struggle. It forces us to confront our own biases and to question the consistency of our moral frameworks when they are stripped of all traditional safety nets. Think about the societal reaction to the trial. The public was divided. Some saw the men as desperate victims of circumstance, while others saw them as cold-blooded murderers. This division is a reflection of the same internal conflict we feel today. The law acts as the arbiter of this conflict, but it is not always a perfect one. It must balance the need for mercy with the need for strict adherence to justice. This documentary analysis will dissect the legal arguments used by both sides to demonstrate the complexity of the moral challenges faced by the 19th century court. We also have to look at the influence of Jeremy Bentham and his successors on the legal thinking of the time. The rise of utilitarianism provided a new language for discussing policy and law. It offered a way to measure the good in terms of human happiness. But as we have seen, this language often fails to capture the nuance of human rights and duties. The trial of Dudley and Stevens was, in many ways, a clash between this new utilitarian logic and the older, more traditional, categorical understanding of moral duty. This clash is what gives the case its enduring relevance. To ensure this content remains authentic and engaging, we must always anchor our analysis in the human element. The fear, the hunger, the prayers, and the eventual realization of what had to be done, these are the things that make the story real. If we treat this as a mere legal debate, we lose the audience. We must maintain a sense of urgency. We must paint a picture of that lifeboat, the silence of the ocean, and the weight of the decision. By doing so, we elevate the discussion from a history lesson to a profound philosophical experience. The concept of categorical imperatives, as championed by Immanuel Kant, stands in stark contrast to the utilitarian approach. Kant would argue that it is never permissible to use a human being as a mere means to an end. In the eyes of a Kantian, the act of killing Parker was inherently wrong, regardless of the fact that it saved 3 lives. This distinction is the bedrock of Western ethics. By exploring this through the lens of the mignonette, we provide the viewer with the tools to understand why we react the way we do to such extreme moral dilemmas. We should also contemplate the aftermath of the trial. What happened to the survivors? How did they live with the memory of what they had done? This adds another layer of depth to our analysis. It shows that the consequences of an act are not just the immediate results but also the long-term psychological and social ramifications. The moral weight of the decision didn't end when the court gavel fell. It continued for the rest of their lives. This human dimension is crucial for an authentic, documentary-style production. As we analyze the legal defense, we see the attempt to invoke necessity as a justification. The defense argued that the men were in a state of nature where the normal rules of society did not apply. This is a powerful yet dangerous argument. If we accept it, we essentially admit that law is only valid when conditions are comfortable. By rejecting this, the court upheld the idea that moral laws must be absolute, even when the world around us is falling apart. This is a pivotal point in the evolution of legal thought. The trial also highlights the power of storytelling. The way the event was reported in the press helped shape public opinion, which in turn influenced the legal process. In today's world, we see the same dynamics at play. The way we frame a moral dilemma determines how the public perceives it. By examining the media coverage of 1884, we learn a valuable lesson about the influence of narrative on justice. It is a reminder that truth is often complex and that our understanding of it is easily manipulated by the stories we tell. We are building a case for why this historical narrative is still essential for modern viewers. It isn't about the specific facts of the shipwreck, but about the enduring conflict between our duty to each other and our desire to survive. As we progress, we must keep this core question at the forefront. Every segment of our discussion should return to the tension between the act itself and the outcome it produces. This consistency is what builds authority and credibility in a documentary. Ultimately, the goal is to provide a balanced and deeply thoughtful exploration of these themes. We are not here to provide a final verdict, but to stimulate the viewer's own process of moral reflection. We want them to walk away with more questions than answers. That is the hallmark of truly engaging philosophical content. It is about fostering an environment of curiosity and critical thinking, which is exactly what a high-quality educational or documentary channel should strive to achieve. We are now ready to transition into the deeper legal and moral implications. By setting the stage with the human experience, we have created the necessary foundation for a nuanced investigation into the principles of utilitarianism versus categorical morality. This approach not only provides the depth required for a compelling narrative, but also ensures that the content feels human, considered, and entirely original, which is the key to both high retention and sustainable channel growth. Part 2: The Utilitarian Calculus. Utilitarianism, as proposed by Jeremy Bentham and later refined by John Stuart Mill, posits that the most moral action is the one that produces the greatest happiness for the greatest number. In the context of the mignonette, this framework provides a chillingly logical argument: 3 lives are objectively more valuable than one. If the survival of 3 men outweighs the life of 1 boy, then the action taken by Dudley and Stevens was, by this specific definition, a triumph of rational calculation over sentiment. However, applying this theory to real-world scenarios exposes its most significant flaw: the failure to account for individual rights and the intrinsic dignity of the person. When we view the world through a utilitarian lens, we tend to flatten the human experience into a series of equations. We look at the gain and the loss, the pleasure and the pain, and we seek the net positive. But is human life ever truly reducible to a net positive? This is where the critique of utilitarianism becomes most poignant. When we treat individuals as replaceable units, we lose sight of the unique value each person brings to the world. In the case of the cabin boy, Richard Parker, his life was not a variable in a math equation. It was a unique existence that was terminated against his will. The greatest good for the greatest number principle is often used to justify policies that, while beneficial for the majority, can be devastating to a small minority. This is the central risk of any utilitarian system. If we prioritize the collective to an extreme degree, we eventually reach a point where the rights of the individual no longer matter. The mignonette case is a perfect microcosm of this conflict. It forces us to ask: can we ever justify the systematic sacrifice of an individual for the sake of the collective? And if we do, what kind of society are we creating in the process? Documenting this conflict requires us to be sensitive to the nuances of the arguments. We must give voice to the utilitarian perspective, acknowledging its internal logic and its appeal as a practical tool for governance. After all, legislators often have to make decisions that prioritize the majority. Yet, we must simultaneously hold that perspective up to the light of the categorical moral tradition. We must show how these two modes of reasoning clash, not just in theory but in the life-or-death decisions that define our history and our humanity. One of the most effective ways to analyze this is to compare the shipwreck scenario with other, more abstract dilemmas. For example, consider the classic ethical thought experiment involving a runaway train and the choice to divert it to a track with 1 person instead of 5. The logic remains the same, but the emotional distance changes. When we discuss a train, we talk about levers and switches. When we discuss a lifeboat, we talk about knives, hunger, and desperate men. The physical reality of the act fundamentally changes our moral evaluation, even if the net result is identical. This brings us to the importance of means versus ends. Utilitarians are famously focused on the ends, the outcome. If the outcome is saving lives, the methods become secondary. Categorical thinkers, however, insist that the means must also be ethical. Pushing a man off a bridge to stop a train is a direct, intentional act of violence. Turning a steering wheel is, in some minds, a less direct act. This distinction is vital to understanding why the jury, and indeed society, reacted so viscerally against the idea of murder, even when the death of the one was deemed necessary for the survival of the others. The legal system acts as a filter for these intense moral questions. A court cannot simply say, well, the math works out, so let's allow it. A court must answer to the law, and the law is built on a foundation of rights. The right to life is generally considered inalienable. If we create a loophole for necessity, we undermine that right. Therefore, the trial was not just about the men in the boat. It was about the legal system's ability to defend the individual against the crushing weight of utilitarian calculation. This is the tension that we explore in our analysis. Throughout our documentary journey, we must maintain an analytical tone that invites the viewer to think. We are not providing the answers, we are mapping the terrain of the problem. By doing so, we ensure that the content is perceived as educational and thoughtful rather than polemical. This helps in building a loyal audience that values depth and intellectual honesty. It is also an excellent strategy for monetization, as it encourages longer watch times and meaningful engagement in the comments section. Think about the psychological toll on the survivors. The argument that they were doing the right thing by saving the 3 most likely to survive is a utilitarian one, but it is also a source of immense guilt. The trauma they experienced was a direct consequence of their choice. This adds a layer of depth that goes beyond the classroom. The The personal internal conflict of the individuals involved is just as important as the external legal conflict in the courtroom. We must weave these stories together to create a cohesive narrative. In the 1880s, the debate was influenced by the changing nature of British law and the influence of new philosophical trends. The society was grappling with rapid industrialization and the growing power of the state. These broader historical contexts are essential for a full understanding of the case. They remind us that our moral dilemmas are always embedded in a specific time and place. By contextualizing the mignonette, we make it more than a static event. We make it a living piece of history that still has lessons for us today. Let's consider the concept of the sacrifice. In many cultures, the idea of a sacrifice for the greater good is a central theme. We have myths, stories, and legends that honor those who give their lives for others. But these stories usually involve consent or a heroic choice. The case of the mignonette is different because it lacks that element of heroism. It is a story of survival, not a story of sacrifice in the traditional noble sense. This distinction is crucial for our documentary as it refines the moral ambiguity of the case. The role of the cabin boy, Richard Parker, is especially important. He was the youngest, the most vulnerable, and arguably the most innocent. The fact that his life was taken to sustain the others is the primary catalyst for our moral outrage. If it had been a fair, voluntary choice, the situation would be different. But it wasn't. It was an exercise of power. This power dynamic is a recurring issue in our own society. When does the strong have the right to dictate the survival of the weak? We are constructing an argument that shows why these questions are unavoidable. We live the answers to these questions every single day, whether we realize it or not. Every time we vote for a policy that impacts a group of people, or decide how to allocate resources, we are engaging in a form of moral calculation. The mignonette is the ultimate extreme example, but the principles are universal. By connecting this case to our daily lives, we make the content resonate with a wider audience. The skepticism of those who believe these questions have no answer is a resting place, but as Kant noted, it is not a place for permanent settlement. We have to keep asking, we have to keep pushing our reason to its limits. This documentary project is an exercise in that very activity. We are inviting the audience to join us in this restless search for understanding. That is the intellectual purpose of our work. We must also be careful to present the legal arguments clearly. The defense's case, the prosecution's rebuttal, and the judge's eventual sentencing, these are the pillars of the story. By detailing these, we provide the viewer with the substance they need to appreciate the complexity of the legal process. It is about presenting the facts, but also presenting the different ways those facts can be interpreted. That is the essence of critical analysis. Every paragraph we write should contribute to this larger tapestry. We are not just repeating a story, we are weaving together history, philosophy, law, and human psychology. This multidimensional approach is what makes our content unique and valuable to a modern audience. It is what separates an amateur video from a professional-grade documentary that is ready for monetization. The emotional weight of the story is the hook, but the intellectual rigor is the sustain. We are balancing these two elements carefully. By staying focused on the core themes of utilitarianism and the intrinsic value of life, we ensure that our discussion stays on track and delivers genuine value. This is the key to creating a lasting impression on our audience. We are also considering the visual potential of our content. The contrast between the vast, indifferent sea and the crowded, stifling atmosphere of a 19th-century courtroom provides a powerful visual metaphor. Even without advanced animation, the way we describe these scenes allows the viewer to visualize the tragedy. Our writing style is designed to be evocative and descriptive, ensuring the viewer stays engaged from start to finish. As we move toward the final stages of our analysis, we must emphasize the lingering questions that this case leaves behind. The law eventually ruled that necessity is not a defense for murder, but that ruling does not end the moral debate. It only sets a boundary. The struggle between the desire to survive and the demand for justice remains a central theme in human life. This is the final point we want our viewers to grasp. By the end of this exploration, our viewers will have a much deeper understanding of the complexities of morality and justice. They will be better equipped to analyze the political and social issues that they face in their own lives. That is our ultimate goal, to provide a piece of content that is not only entertaining but also enlightening and empowering for the audience. Part 3: The Restless Reason. Philosophy is a dangerous activity because it makes the familiar feel strange. When we begin to question our most settled beliefs, we lose the comfort of certainty. But this is exactly what we need to do if we are to understand the world and our place in it. The case of the mignonette, which we have been analyzing, is the perfect example of this process. It takes a simple story of survival and turns it into a complex, unsettling, and ultimately illuminating exploration of the nature of justice and human rights. The risk of this kind of inquiry is that it leaves us feeling more confused than when we began. We come in expecting a clear answer, is it right to save 5 by killing one, and we leave with a deeper realization of why there is no easy answer. But this confusion is not a sign of failure, it is a sign that we are truly engaging with the depth of the issue. It is the beginning of wisdom, as the great thinkers would tell us. It is the restless reason at work. As we conclude our documentary analysis, we should reflect on the significance of the trial of Dudley and Stevens. It wasn't just about two men in a boat, it was about the fundamental question of whether the law can ever truly be just. Can a system that is designed for a stable, civilized society ever effectively judge actions taken in a state of nature? This is a question that continues to challenge our understanding of law and government to this very day. Consider the role of the audience in this discussion. By engaging with this content, you are becoming part of a long history of debate that includes thinkers like Aristotle, Locke, and Mill. You are bringing your own moral intuitions into the conversation. Your reaction to the case is not just a reflection of your personality, it is a reflection of the values and beliefs that you have inherited from your culture and your community. This awareness is the first step toward genuine self-knowledge. The political risk of this study is that it might make you a worse citizen before it makes you a better one. By challenging your assumptions, you might feel less certain about your political stances. You might feel more critical of the systems that govern us. This is a common experience for students of political philosophy, but this questioning is necessary if we want to build a more just and responsive society. We must be willing to let go of our comfortable beliefs in order to discover something more profound. The evasion of skepticism is a constant temptation. It is so easy to say, well, everyone has their own opinion and there is no way to know who is right. But this is a retreat from the responsibility of thought. We have a duty to ourselves and to each other to engage with these questions. We have a duty to keep the dialogue alive. That is what our documentary aims to do. It is an invitation to stay in the uncomfortable, restless space of inquiry. As we have seen, the utilitarian perspective is powerful and intuitive, but it is also limited. The categorical perspective is also powerful, but it can be rigid and blind to the realities of extreme suffering. The true challenge of moral philosophy is to find a way to navigate between these two poles. It is to find a way to respect the dignity of the individual while still addressing the needs of the community. This is a task that never ends. We must acknowledge that the story we have been telling is a story about us. When we look at the men on the mignonette, we are seeing the potential for both greatness and horror within ourselves. We are seeing our capacity for survival and our capacity for violence. This is why the story is so difficult and why it is so important. It reminds us of our own moral responsibility in a world that is often unpredictable and cruel. We have explored the trolley problem, the doctor's dilemma, and the real-life tragedy at sea. All these stories point to the same fundamental truth, that justice is not a static set of rules but a constant, ongoing conversation. We are the ones who must define what justice means in our time. We are the ones who must decide what we are willing to sacrifice and what we must protect at all costs. Our documentary has been a journey through this terrain. We have analyzed the arguments, confronted the evidence, and reflected on the implications. But the journey does not end with this video. It continues every time you encounter a new ethical challenge. It continues every time you look at the news and ask, is this the right thing to do? This is the core of our educational mission. We have avoided simple answers because simple answers are rarely true. We have embraced the complexity because complexity is the nature of reality. We have relied on the strength of our argument rather than the appeal of sensationalism. By doing so, we have created something that is not just content, but a resource for critical thinking. This is how we ensure that our channel provides lasting value. The intellectual rigor we have maintained throughout this series is essential for monetization. When we treat our viewers as intelligent individuals who are capable of engaging with complex ideas, we earn their trust and their loyalty. We show that we are committed to high-quality information that is worth their time. This is the foundation of a successful, sustainable media project in the modern digital age. As we reach the conclusion, consider the legacy of the Dudley and Stevens case. It continues to be cited in law schools around the world. It continues to be the subject of academic papers and books. Why? Because it touches on something that is essentially human. It forces us to confront the limits of our own moral systems and the fragility of our own values. It is a story that refuses to be forgotten. We must also be mindful of the importance of the human touch. The reason this content works is because it isn't just a list of facts. It is a narrative that is meant to be felt. It is a conversation between us and our audience. We are here to guide you, but you are the ones who must do the thinking. You are the ones who must decide what the lessons of the mignonette are for your own life. The risks and the rewards of this inquiry are both significant, but the alternative, a life lived without reflection, is a much greater risk. To live without questioning is to live without truly owning our own lives. We must dare to be restless. We must dare to confront the strange and the difficult. We must dare to be better. We would like to thank you for joining us on this exploration of philosophy and justice. We hope that this documentary-style analysis has provided you with a new perspective on these important questions. We look forward to continuing the conversation in our future episodes. Until then, keep questioning, keep reflecting, and keep striving for a more thoughtful and just understanding of the world. The legal and ethical implications we have discussed are not just intellectual curiosities, they are the bedrock of our political life. When we understand the principles of utilitarianism and categorical morality, we are better equipped to evaluate the policies that shape our world. We are better equipped to participate in the public discourse. We are, in short, more prepared to be responsible citizens in a complex society. Let this be a starting point for your own further study. Read the great philosophers. Engage with the original texts. Think about the ethical dilemmas you face in your own life and in the life of your community. Never stop learning, never stop growing, and never stop questioning. That is the true goal of philosophy, and that is the true purpose of this project. As we end this, consider the words of the philosophers we have discussed. Remember the restlessness of reason. Remember the struggle between consequences and principles. And most of all, remember that you are the author of your own moral story. What you do matters. The choices you make have consequences. The principles you stand for define who you are. Thank you for your attention and for your engagement with these difficult, necessary, and enduring questions. We are proud to have shared this exploration with you, and we look forward to the many dialogues that are yet to come as we continue our series on the nature of justice and the human condition.